in the far southwest of Dorne, where the Torrentine River meets the summer sea, stands Starfall. The castle rises on an island where fresh water mingles with salt. White stone towers catch the first light of morning. They glow like fallen stars. For thousands of years, House Dayne has ruled here, and for thousands of years, they have kept a secret that fell from the sky. Arthur Dayne was born in this place of ancient magic and old stone. The exact year is lost to history, but we know he came into the world sometime during the reign of Aegon the Unlikely. His father was Lord Dayne. His mother's name is not recorded in the histories. He had a sister, Ashara, whose beauty would later become legendary. But Arthur's destiny was tied to something older than beauty, something that had crashed into the ground long before any Dane drew breath. The sword called Dawn. Most noble houses in Westeros carry Valyrian steel. These blades were forged in dragonfire before the Doom. They are sharp enough to cut through lesser steel, light enough to move like wind, dark as smoke. Every great house covets them. The Starks have ice. The Lannisters have bright raw, though it was lost in the ruins of Valyria. The Mormonts have Longclaw. These weapons are marks of power and ancient lineage. But Dawn is different. Dawn was not forged in Valyria. It is older than the freehold itself. The blade is pale as milk glass. It glows with its own light when drawn. According to the histories, it was forged from the metal of a fallen star. Thousands of years ago, something fell from the heavens. It struck the ground near Starfall. The heat of its passing must have lit the sky like a second sun. When the smoke cleared and the earth cooled, the Danes found metal unlike anything else in the world. They forged it into a sword, a blade that would become legend, but not every Dane could wield it. Only one who proved worthy could carry Dawn. Only one who earned the title through valor and skill. That man would be called the Sword of the Morning. It was not a title that passed from father to son. It was not bought with gold or claimed through birth. It had to be earned. And when there was no knight worthy enough, Dawn would sit in its place of honor, waiting, silent, patient as the stars that still wheeled overhead. Arthur Dayne would become the Sword of the Morning. But first, he had to become a knight. His childhood at Starfall shaped him in ways that would matter later. Dawn is different from the rest of Westeros. The people follow different laws. Women inherit as easily as men. Bastards are not scorned the way they are in the North or the Reach. The deserts breed a different kind of strength. The sun burns away weakness. The mountains guard secrets. And the Dornish remember. They remember Nymeria and her 10,000 ships. They remember remaining free while Aegon the Conqueror bent 6 kingdoms to his will. They remember every slight and every debt. Arthur learned to fight in the Dornish way. Speed over strength. Precision over power. The great swords favored by northern knights were too slow for the desert. A Dornish fighter moved like water, struck like a viper. Arthur trained in the yard at Starfall, where the sea wind carried salt and the stones grew hot under the sun. He learned from masters of the spear, from men who could put an arrow through a ring at 100 paces, from women who fought with no less skill than men. But he also learned the old ways of knighthood, the vows, the codes, the 7-pointed star. Dawn might have kept some of its ancient customs, but the faith of the Seven had come south with the Andals long ago. Arthur would have heard the Septons speak of the Seven, the father's justice, the mother's mercy, the warrior's courage, the smith's strength, the maiden's innocence, the crone's wisdom, the stranger's mystery. These were more than words to young Arthur. They were the foundation of what a knight should be. We do not know the name of the knight who dubbed him. We do not know the hour or the place. But somewhere in his youth, Arthur Dayne knelt as a squire and rose as a knight. He swore the vows to defend the weak, to uphold justice, to protect women and children, to serve his lord with loyalty. These words would bind him for the rest of his life, even when they led him to his death. Arthur's skill with a blade became apparent early. The histories tell us he was a prodigy. Some men trained for decades to master the sword. Arthur moved as if he had been born with steel in his hand. He was not the largest man, not the strongest, but he was fast, faster than seemed possible. His strikes were precise. His defense was perfect. When he sparred in the training yard, other knights would stop to watch. When he fought in earnest, men died before they understood what had happened. But skill alone does not make a legend. Many men can kill. Many knights have won tourneys. What set Arthur apart was something else, something harder to name. Honor, perhaps. Or maybe it was simply that he believed in the vows he had sworn. In a world where most knights used their oaths as pretty words to hide behind, Arthur Dayne meant every word. He could have stayed in Dorne. He could have served his father at Starfall, protected the borders, wed some lady from another house, fathered children, lived a long life under the Dornish sun. But greatness calls some men away from comfort, and Arthur Dayne was meant for more than guarding an island castle, no matter how ancient its stones. The title of Sword of the Morning came to him. We do not know exactly when. The histories do not record the ceremony. But at some point, Arthur proved himself worthy. He took up Dawn, the pale blade that glowed like captured moonlight, the sword that had waited for a champion, and when he held it in his hands, the fit was perfect, as if the star that had fallen from the sky thousands of years ago had been waiting for this moment, for this man. With Dawn at his side, Arthur's reputation grew. Stories spread north from Dawn, tales of a knight who moved like lightning, who had never been defeated, who carried a blade that shone with its own light. The small folk whispered about him in taverns. Lords spoke his name with respect. And in King's Landing, where the Iron Throne sat and kings ruled the Seven Kingdoms, someone was listening. The Kingsguard needed knights, the Order of Seven who protected the king with their lives, who gave up all claims, all lands, all wives and children, who wore white cloaks and stood eternal watch. These were supposed to be the finest knights in all the realm, the best swords, the truest hearts. In practice, sometimes political favors won a white cloak. Sometimes a lord wanted his inconvenient son out of the way. Sometimes money changed hands. But sometimes, rarely, a man joined the Kingsguard who actually deserved the honor. Arthur Dayne would be one of those men. The call came from King's Landing, an invitation, or perhaps a summons. The king wanted to meet the Sword of the Morning, wanted to see if the stories were true, wanted to test whether this Dornish knight with his strange pale blade was worthy of guarding the royal family. Arthur could have refused. He could have sent word that Starfall needed him, that Dawn was his home, that he had no interest in serving the Iron Throne. But that was not who he was. When duty called, Arthur Dayne answered, even if it meant leaving behind everything he knew, even if it meant giving up the life he might have had. He took Dawn from its place. He said goodbye to his family, to his sister Ashara, whose fate would later become tangled with his own in ways neither could foresee. He left the white towers of Starfall behind, left the sound of the sea and the heat of the dawnish sun, and he rode north, toward King's Landing, toward the Iron Throne, toward a destiny that would make him a legend and lead him to die in a dry land far from home, with blood on his sword and secrets in his heart. But that ending was still years away. For now, Arthur Dayne was young. He was skilled. He carried a blade forged from a fallen star, and he was riding toward greatness, though he could not yet know the price it would cost him. The road from Dawn to King's Landing is long. It winds through the mountains of the Red Princes, across the plains where the reach spreads green and gold, past castles and holdfasts where lesser lords watch the roads and count their coins. Arthur would have seen the realm in all its variety. The poverty of the small folk in their crude villages, the wealth of the lords in their stone halls, the knights riding to tourneys, the septons walking barefoot on pilgrimages, the merchants hauling goods from market to market. This was the world he had sworn to protect. Not just the kings and lords, but all of it. The whole vast complicated tapestry of the 7 kingdoms. And soon he would stand at the very center of power, in the Red Keep, in the throne room where Aegon the Conqueror had first sat upon the Iron Throne forged from the swords of his enemies. Arthur Dayne had no way of knowing that the king he would serve was already beginning to change, that the man who sat the throne was slowly losing his mind, that the next decades would see rebellion and blood and the fall of a dynasty that had ruled for nearly 300 years. All he knew was that he had been called, and he would answer, because that was what knights did, what the Sword of the Morning did, what Arthur Dayne would always do, until the day he died with his king's secrets on a barren tower in Dawn, far from the white walls of Starfall where his legend had begun. But first, he had to reach King's Landing. He had to take the vows. He had to don the white cloak and join the brotherhood that would become more than family to him. He had to become what he was always meant to be, one of the greatest knights who ever lived, and one of the most tragic. The story of Arthur Dayne, the Sword of the Morning, was only beginning. When Arthur Dayne first saw King's Landing, he must have understood how different his life was about to become. The city sprawled across 3 hills like a stain. Smoke rose from 1,000 cook fires. The streets twisted like a maze. The smell hit visitors before they even reached the gates. Sweat and salt and fish. Waste running through open gutters. Thousands upon thousands of people crammed together behind walls. After the clean white stones of Starfall and the open spaces of Dawn, King's Landing must have seemed like another world entirely. But above it all, on Aegon's high hill, the Red Keep rose, red stone towers catching the light, walls thick enough to withstand any siege, and somewhere inside, the Iron Throne, the seat of power for all 7 kingdoms, forged from 1,000 swords of Aegon's enemies, sharp and cruel and uncomfortable, exactly the kind of throne that would cut a man who was not careful. Arthur rode through the streets, past the Sept of Baelor with its 7 crystal towers, past the dragon pit, broken and abandoned since the dragons died, past taverns where sellswords drank and brothels where lords pretended not to go. The small folk stared at him as he passed, a Dornish knight with a pale blade at his hip. Dawn drew eyes wherever it went. The sword seemed to glow even in its sheath, like it carried its own light, like the star it had been forged from had never truly died. At the Red Keep, Arthur would have been received with a ceremony due to a lord's son. Servants took his horse. Guards escorted him through halls decorated with tapestries showing Targaryen victories, dragons burning Harrenhal, Aegon the Conqueror accepting surrender, generations of silver-haired kings sitting in the Iron Throne. This was a place that remembered its power, that wanted visitors to feel small beneath the weight of history. King Aerys II received him in the throne room. This was not yet the Mad King who would burn men alive for amusement, not yet the paranoid tyrant who saw traitors in every shadow. But the seeds were already there. Even then, some courtiers whispered about his moods, his sudden angers, the way his eyes would go distant, as if he was seeing something no one else could see. But Aerys was still young, still handsome, with the silver-gold hair of the Targaryens, still capable of charm when he chose. And he was fascinated by the stories he had heard. A knight from Dawn who had never been defeated, who carried a sword forged from a fallen star, who moved faster than any man alive. Aerys wanted to see if the stories were true. He wanted Arthur to demonstrate his skill, to prove he was worthy of consideration for the Kingsguard. The Kingsguard, the order that had protected Targaryen kings since Aegon the Conqueror first established it. 7 knights in white cloaks, 7 sworn brothers who gave up everything to stand eternal watch. They took no wives, held no lands, fathered no children. Their only marriage was to their duty. Their only family was their sworn brothers. Their only purpose was to keep the king alive. In theory, these were the finest knights in all the realm. In practice, politics often played a role. Some white cloaks were given as rewards to powerful lords. Some were a way to remove inconvenient heirs from the line of succession. Some were genuinely earned through valor and skill. The quality of the Kingsguard rose and fell with the judgment of the king who chose them. But in Arthur's time, the Kingsguard was strong. Lord Commander Gerald Hightower, called the White Bull, led them. He was old, but still formidable. A knight who had served 3 kings and earned respect from everyone. Sir Barristan Selmy, called Barristan the Bold, wore the white cloak. He had earned his knighthood at 10 and 6 by fighting in a tourney as a mystery knight. He had cut his way through the Kingswood Brotherhood to save the king. He was already legendary and would live long enough to become even more so. These were the men Arthur would join. These would be his brothers, his family, the only companions he would have for the rest of his life. But first, he had to prove himself worthy. The test came in the training yard. Arthur faced knights and men-at-arms who served the crown. They came at him one after another, some with swords, some with spears, some with axes. It did not matter. Arthur moved through them like wind through grass. His blade was always where it needed to be, blocking, parrying, striking. He made it look easy, like he was dancing rather than fighting, like the sword was part of his body rather than something he held. Dawn flashed in the sunlight, pale as morning. The knights who faced Arthur fell back bruised and disarmed, but not dead. He had no need to kill them to prove his point. The skill was obvious. Even King Aerys, who knew little of swordplay himself, could see that Arthur Dayne was something special, something rare. The offer came that same day. a place in the King's Guard, a white cloak, a position that would make Arthur one of the 7 most important knights in all the realm. He would stand at the king's side, sleep outside the royal chambers, guard the royal family with his life. It was the highest honor a knight could achieve, but it came with a price. Everything Arthur might have wanted for himself would be gone. He could never marry, never father children, never inherit Starfall, though as a second son that had always been unlikely. He would give up his own name, in a sense. He would no longer be Arthur of House Dayne. He would be Ser Arthur Dayne of the King's Guard. Nothing more, nothing less. Some men might have hesitated, might have asked for time to consider, might have wondered if the honor was worth the sacrifice. Arthur Dayne did not hesitate. He had come to King's Landing knowing what might be asked of him. He had sworn oaths as a knight. Now he would swear greater oaths. He would become something more than just a skilled fighter. He would become a guardian, a protector, one of 7 who stood between the king and death. He accepted. The ceremony took place in the 7th. The High Septon himself performed the rites. Arthur knelt before the altar of the 7. He laid down his sword. He spoke the vows that would bind him for life. He swore to defend the king, to obey his commands, to keep his secrets, to give his life if needed. He swore to take no wife, to hold no lands, to father no children. He swore to be a shield, not a sword, to guard, not to rule, to serve, not to command. When the vows were complete, Lord Commander Gerald Hightower draped the white cloak across Arthur's shoulders. The cloth was heavy, pure white wool, unmarked except for the clasps that held it in place. Every knight in the realm knew what that cloak meant, the burden it carried, the honor it represented. Arthur Dayne rose as a member of the King's Guard, one of 7, a sworn brother to men he barely knew but would trust with his life. He was no longer just the sword of the morning. He was a King's Guard knight, and he would be until the day he died. His brothers welcomed him. Gerald Hightower, the White Bull, gripped his arm and nodded approval. Barristan Selmy, who understood what it meant to be chosen for skill rather than politics, smiled. The others, whose names history remembers less clearly, accepted him into their ranks. They were a brotherhood now, bound by oaths stronger than blood. The King's Guard lived together in the White Sword Tower, a round tower in the Red Keep where their rooms spiraled upward. Each knight had his own small chamber, simple, bare, a place to sleep and keep their armor. Nothing more was needed. They spent their days and nights on duty, standing watch, following the king, protecting the royal family. Arthur learned the rhythms of this new life quickly. He learned which halls the king favored, which chambers were used for what purposes. He learned the faces of every servant, every courtier, every guard. He learned to read the moods of the court, to see the currents of power and ambition that flowed beneath the surface of every smile and bow. And he learned about the man he had sworn to protect. King Aerys II was not an easy man to serve. Even then, before madness took him fully, there were signs, mood swings, paranoia, flashes of cruelty. One day he would be charming and generous. The next day he would rage at servants over imagined slights. He saw plots that did not exist. He trusted his hand, Tywin Lannister, but also resented him. He loved his wife, Queen Rhaella, but also hurt her. The King's Guard saw everything. They stood in the room when the king met with his council. They waited outside the royal chambers at night They heard the arguments, saw the bruises, knew the secrets that no one else knew, and they said nothing, because that was part of their oath, to keep the king's secrets, to serve without question. It must have been difficult for a man like Arthur, a man who believed in honor, in justice, in protecting the weak, to stand and watch while a king acted without honor, to remain silent when speaking might have helped. But the oaths were clear. The King's Guard did not question, did not judge, did not interfere. They obeyed. This was the first lesson Arthur Dayne learned as a King's Guard knight, that honor and duty could conflict, that the vows he had sworn might ask him to do things that troubled his conscience, that being the finest swordsman in the realm meant nothing if he could not also master himself. But there were good moments too, times when the duty was clear and the purpose was noble. When bandits threatened the King's Road, the King's Guard rode out. When rebellion stirred in the Stormlands, they accompanied the king's forces. When tourneys were held, they competed and showed the realm what true skill looked like. Arthur's reputation grew. Stories spread about the Sword of the Morning, who now wore a white cloak, about duels where he defeated 3 knights at once, about how his blade moved so fast it seemed to blur, about how he had never been defeated, not once in all his years of fighting. The small folk loved him. They saw him as a true knight, the kind from the songs, noble and skilled and handsome. They did not know about the complicated oaths, about the secrets he kept, about the things he saw and could not speak of. They only saw the legend. Other knights respected him, even feared him in a way. To face Arthur Dayne in the training yard was to learn humility. To challenge him in a tourney was to accept defeat before the lance was even couched. He was simply better, faster, more skilled. Dawn flashed in his hands like lightning, and no one could match him. But Arthur remained humble. He did not boast, did not swagger. He understood that skill was a gift, not an achievement. That being the best meant having the greatest responsibility. That the sword was a tool, not a toy. He served, he protected, he obeyed, and he became everything a Kingsguard knight was supposed to be. His bond with his sworn brothers deepened. Barristan Selmy became more than just a companion. They were 2 of the finest knights alive, serving together. They trained together, stood watch together, shared the burden of seeing things they could not change. They understood each other in ways no one else could. They both knew what it meant to be truly skilled with a blade, and they both knew what it meant to serve a king who was beginning to slip away from reason. Years passed. Arthur served faithfully. He protected Aerys. He guarded the royal family. He stood at the throne room door while the king dispensed justice. He rode with the royal retinue when they traveled. He did everything his oaths required. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the king got worse. The mood swings became more extreme. The paranoia deepened. The cruelty increased. Aerys began to suspect everyone. He stopped trusting his advisors. He started seeing traitors in every shadow. He grew obsessed with wildfire, with burning his enemies, with proving his power. The Kingsguard watched. They knew, but they could do nothing. Their oaths bound them. They had sworn to serve, to obey, to keep the king's secrets, even when those secrets were dark, even when obedience meant standing aside while terrible things happened. This was the true test of Arthur Dayne's character. Not his skill with a sword, not his speed or strength, but his ability to keep his vows even when they cost him something, even when honor and duty pulled in different directions, even when being the sword of the morning meant sometimes sheathing that sword and standing still. But a storm was coming, a rebellion that would tear the realm apart. And Arthur Dayne, the greatest knight of his age, would be tested in ways he could never have imagined. His skill would not be enough. His honor would not save him, and his oaths would lead him to a lonely tower in dawn, where he would die with secrets on his lips and blood on his blade. But that was still years away. For now, Arthur Dayne stood in the White Sword Tower. He wore his white cloak. He carried Dawn at his hip, and he was exactly what he had always wanted to be, a knight of the King's Guard, one of 7, sworn to serve until death. He had achieved greatness. He had earned his place in history. He had become a legend. The price for that greatness would come due later, when the rebellion came, when loyalties were tested, when he had to choose between a mad king and the prince he respected, between his oaths and his conscience. Arthur Dayne had risen to become one of the finest knights who ever lived. Now he would have to learn what that truly meant, what it cost, what it would take from him in the end. The white cloak changed everything. Arthur Dayne no longer belonged to himself. He belonged to the king. Every hour of every day, every decision filtered through one question. What does my duty require? For a man who had grown up in Dawn, where the sun was bright and the customs were different, serving in the Red Keep meant learning a new kind of darkness, the kind that grew in the hearts of men who held too much power for too long. King Aerys II was not born mad. The histories are clear on this. As a young man, he had been charming, handsome, full of grand ambitions for the realm. He had dreams of building a new Valyria in Westeros, of bringing back the glory of his ancestors, of being remembered as a great king. But somewhere along the way, those dreams curdled. The ambition remained, but it twisted into something else, something dangerous. Arthur watched it happen, year by year, season by season. The changes were small at first, a sharper word than necessary, a punishment that went too far, a flash of anger over some minor slight. The court learned to read the king's moods, to step carefully around him, to smile and bow and agree, even when they disagreed in their hearts. The King's Guard saw more than the court. They stood in the shadows of the throne room. They waited outside the royal chambers. They heard things no one else heard, saw things no one else saw. And they kept silent, because that was the oath, to keep the king's secrets, all of them, even the ones that weighed heavy on the soul. Tywin Lannister served as Hand of the King during these years, the young lord of Casterly Rock. Brilliant, ruthless, efficient. He ran the realm while Aerys dreamed and raged. For years, this arrangement worked. The king wore the crown, and Tywin did the work. The realm prospered, trade flourished. The roads were safe. Justice was dispensed fairly, if harshly. But Aerys resented his hand, resented needing him, resented that everyone knew Tywin was the real power behind the throne, resented that his own glory was always shadowed by the Lannisters' competence. The resentment grew like a poison in the king's heart, and Arthur watched it grow, knowing there was nothing he could do to stop it. The King's Guard's duty was clear: protect the king's life, obey his commands, guard his family. But nowhere in the oath did it say they had to protect the king from himself. Nowhere did it give them permission to question or advise. They were swords, not counselors, shields, not guides. They stood and watched and served no matter what they saw. Arthur Dayne was not the only one who struggled with this. Barristan Selmy, Barristan the Bold, felt it too. He had earned his white cloak through valor and skill. He believed in the ideals of knighthood, in protecting the innocent, in serving with honor. But their oaths bound them to serve the king, not the realm. And sometimes those two duties did not align. The defiance of Duskendale changed everything. It happened in the year 277 after Aegon's conquest. Lord Dennis Darklyn of Duskendale refused to pay taxes to the crown. He wanted more independence for his town, more control over the port. When the king demanded he pay what was owed, Lord Darklyn refused. And when King Aerys came to Duskendale to deal with the matter personally, Lord Darklyn did the unthinkable. He took the king prisoner. The news reached King's Landing like a thunderclap. The king had been captured, held in the Dun Fort. Lord Darklyn's wife, a woman from Myr named Sarala, encouraged him to use the king as a hostage, to make demands, to extract concessions. It was madness. Taking a king prisoner never ended well, but Lord Darklyn was desperate, and desperate men make terrible choices. Tywin Lannister prepared to march on Duskendale with the full might of the crown. He would take the town by force, storm the castle, free the king, or die trying. But there was a problem. If Tywin attacked, Lord Darklyn might kill King Aerys before the walls fell. The king's life hung by a thread, and that thread was held by a minor lord who had made a catastrophic mistake. The King's Guard wanted to go, to rescue their king, to do what they had sworn to do. But Tywin held them back. He needed a smaller force, a precise strike, not a show of power, but a quiet rescue. And so he chose one man, one knight, the best fighter they had, besides Arthur himself, Sir Barristan Selmy. Barristan went alone. He entered Duskendale in secret, made his way through the town to the Dun Fort, fought his way through guards and doors, found the king locked in a tower room, killed Lord Darklyn's men, freed King Aerys, and brought him home. It was a feat worthy of songs. Barristan the Bold had earned his name a dozen times over, but this cemented it. He had saved the king's life, fulfilled the oath of the King's Guard in the most dramatic way possible. The realm celebrated. The small folk sang songs about it. Barristan was a hero. But the king who came back from Duskendale was not the same king who had been taken. Something broke in Aerys during those months of captivity. Whatever madness had been growing in him before now bloomed fully. He had been humiliated, held prisoner by a minor lord, made to feel weak and powerless. And Aerys could not tolerate weakness, not in others, and especially not in himself. Lord Dennis Darklyn was executed, not quickly, not cleanly. Aerys had him killed slowly. His entire family was destroyed. The male line ended. The women were sent to the Silent Sisters or forced into marriages that removed their names. The town of Duskendale was punished. Sarala of Myr was tortured and burned alive. Aerys watched it all and felt no mercy. Arthur Dayne stood in the throne room when Lord Darklyn died. He watched the execution, heard the screams, saw the king's face. Aerys smiled. He enjoyed it. The man who had been charming and ambitious had become something else, something cruel, something broken, and Arthur could do nothing. His duty was to protect the king, not to judge him, not to question him, not to stop him from making choices that darkened his soul. The oath was clear. Obey, serve, keep silent. After Duskendale, Aerys grew paranoid. He saw traitors everywhere. He stopped trusting his advisors. He began to suspect even Tywin Lannister, the man who had run the realm for him all these years, the hand who had made him wealthy and kept the peace. Aerys looked at Tywin and saw a rival, a man who might want the throne for himself. The relationship between king and hand deteriorated. Aerys insulted Tywin in public, refused his counsel, made decisions specifically to spite him. He appointed inferior men to important positions just to show he could. He rejected sound advice out of pride, and Tywin, who had served faithfully for years, began to understand that his service meant nothing, that the king he had elevated and supported now hated him. The breaking point came over a marriage proposal. Tywin had 2 children, twins, Cersei and Jaime. Beautiful and talented, the boy was already showing promise as a fighter. The girl was clever and ambitious. Tywin proposed that Cersei should marry Prince Rhaegar, the heir to the throne. It would bind House Lannister to House Targaryen, would ensure the succession, would create an alliance that would strengthen the realm. Aerys refused. He did not just decline politely. He mocked the proposal. He insulted Cersei, implied that no Lannister was good enough for a dragon. He rejected Tywin's service and his family in one blow. And then, to make it worse, he appointed Jaime Lannister to the King's Guard. On the surface, it seemed like an honor. Jaime was young, only 15, but already skilled. He would be the youngest knight ever to wear the white cloak. But everyone understood what Aerys was really doing. He was taking Tywin's heir, the boy who would have inherited Casterly Rock. By making Jaime a Kingsguard knight, Aerys ensured that Tywin's male line would die with him, that his wealth and power would pass to someone else. It was a calculated insult, a way to hurt Tywin where it would damage him most. And Tywin, who had endured much, could endure no more. He resigned as Hand of the King, left King's Landing, returned to Casterly Rock. The best hand the realm had seen in generations was gone, driven away by a king's petty cruelty. Arthur Dayne gained a new sworn brother that day. Jaime Lannister took the white cloak, spoke the vows, joined the King's Guard. He was so young, so full of ideals. He believed in the songs, in honor and glory. He thought wearing the white cloak would make him a hero. Arthur must have seen something of himself in the boy. The same belief in knighthood, the same dedication to the vows. But Arthur had served long enough to know the truth. The white cloak was a burden, as much as an honor. The oaths bound you in ways you could not anticipate, and serving a mad king meant compromising pieces of your soul, one day at a time. He tried to teach Jaime, to train him properly, to show him not just how to fight, but how to serve. Barristan helped too. The 2 greatest living swordsmen teaching the youngest member of their brotherhood. Jaime learned quickly. He was talented, fast, strong for his age. Within a few years, he would be formidable. Not at Arthur's level, perhaps. No one was at Arthur's level, but skilled enough to hold his own against almost anyone else. But skill with a sword was the easy part. The hard part was learning to obey when you disagreed, to stand silent when you wanted to speak, to watch injustice and do nothing because your oath demanded it. These were the lessons Jaime struggled with. These were the lessons that would eventually break him. Meanwhile, King Aerys grew worse. His paranoia deepened. He started seeing plots that did not exist. He believed his food was poisoned, so he barely ate. He thought his servants might kill him, so he trusted no one. He grew thin and wild-looking. His hair became long and tangled. His nails grew into claws because he would not let anyone near him with a blade. And he burned people more and more often. Wildfire became his tool of choice, the substance that burned green and hot and could not be extinguished with water. Aerys loved it, loved watching traitors burn, loved the power it gave him. He had caches of wildfire placed throughout King's Landing, under the sept of Baelor, under the Red Keep itself, under the streets, thousands of pots waiting to burn. The King's Guard knew. They had to know. They stood at the king's side when he gave the orders. They watched the pyromancers come and go. They heard Aerys whisper about burning his enemies, burning the city, burning everyone if he had to. And they kept the secrets, because that was the oath, to keep the king's secrets, no matter how dark. Arthur Dayne must have struggled with this more than most. He was Dornish, from a land where honor meant something specific, where justice was taken seriously, where the strong were expected to protect the weak. But his oath to the King's Guard superseded everything else. He had sworn to serve the king, and so he served, even as the king descended into madness. But there was light in the darkness. There was Prince Rhaegar, the king's son and heir. Everything Aerys was not. Rhaegar was thoughtful, educated. He read books and played the harp. He was skilled at arms, but not cruel. He cared about the realm, about justice, about doing what was right. The court looked to him as the future, as the promise that the madness would end when Aerys finally died. Arthur served Rhaegar too. The King's Guard protected the entire royal family, not just the king. And protecting Rhaegar was easier. The prince treated his guards with respect, spoke to them as men, not tools. Arthur developed a bond with Rhaegar. Not friendship exactly. The King's Guard did not have friends, but something close. Loyalty, respect, trust. Rhaegar trusted Arthur with tasks that required discretion, relied on his skill and his silence. And Arthur, who struggled to serve a mad king, found purpose in serving a prince who might one day be a good king, who might restore the honor of House Targaryen, who might make the realm what it should be. But even Rhaegar was not perfect. He was obsessed with prophecy, with ancient texts, with the idea that a great danger was coming and that he had a role to play in stopping it. He believed in the prince that was promised, in the song of ice and fire, in destiny. These beliefs would lead him to make choices that would shake the realm, choices that would lead to rebellion and death. For now, though, Arthur served. He wore his white cloak. He stood his watch. He protected the king, even when the king was barely worth protecting. He trained with his sworn brothers. He carried Dawn and used it only when necessary. He kept the secrets he was sworn to keep. And he waited, because a storm was building. Anyone with eyes could see it. The king was mad. The realm was restless. The lords were unhappy. Tywin Lannister sat in Casterly Rock and nursed his grudges. The bannermen of the great houses watched and wondered how long the madness would continue, how long they would have to endure a king who burned his subjects and saw traitors in every shadow. The storm would break soon, and when it did, Arthur Dayne would have to make choices. Choices between duty and honor, between the king and the prince, between his oaths and his conscience. Choices that would lead him to a tower in Dawn where he would make his final stand. But he did not know that yet. For now, he was simply a knight of the King's Guard, serving, obeying, keeping the secrets, standing watch over a king who was slowly losing his mind and a realm that was slowly coming apart. Arthur Dayne was the greatest knight alive, the Sword of the Morning, a legend in white cloak. But legends cannot stop history, cannot prevent tragedy, cannot save kings from themselves. All Arthur could do was serve faithfully and hope that his service meant something, that his oaths had value, that when the end came, he would have done his duty, even if that duty cost him everything. The breaking point came at Harrenhal, a great tourney, the largest gathering of lords and knights in a generation. It should have been a celebration, a chance for the realm to come together, to forget about the mad king for a few days and enjoy the spectacle of knights in armor and ladies in silk. But Harrenhal would not be remembered for the jousts or the feasts. It would be remembered as the place where everything began to fall apart. Prince Rhaegar won the tourney. He rode magnificently, unhorsed night after night. Even Arthur Dayne fell to him in the lists, though some whispered that Arthur had let him win out of respect. In the final tilt, Rhaegar defeated Sir Barristan Selmy. The crowd roared. The prince had proven himself a warrior as well as a scholar. He should have crowned his wife, Princess Elia of Dawn, as the queen of love and beauty. That was tradition. That was what every man did. Instead, Rhaegar rode past his wife, past his own sworn brothers who stood watching, and he laid a crown of blue winter roses in the lap of Lyanna Stark, the daughter of Lord Rhaegar Stark, a girl betrothed to Robert Baratheon, a girl from the north who had nothing to do with Rhaegar or his house. The silence that followed was deafening. Then the whispers began. Every person at that tourney understood what they had just witnessed. An insult to Princess Elia, a slight to House Martell, a provocation to House Stark and House Baratheon, the kind of gesture that started wars. Arthur Dayne stood in his white cloak and watched it happen. He said nothing, did nothing, because what could he do? The King's Guard did not question princes, did not interfere in matters of the heart, but he must have known, must have seen the danger, must have understood that this moment would echo through history in ways no one could predict. Months later, Rhaegar took Lyanna Stark. The histories disagree on the details. Some say he kidnapped her, stole her away like a villain from a song. Others whisper that she went willingly, that she loved him, that they ran away together. The truth died with them, and all that remains are stories that contradict each other. What is known is this: Lyanna disappeared. Brandon Stark, her brother, rode to King's Landing in a rage. He shouted for Rhaegar to come out and die. He demanded justice. He called the prince a kidnapper and a rapist. And King Aerys, already deep in his madness, sought treason. Brandon Stark was arrested. His father, Lord Rhaegar Stark, was summoned to answer for his son's crimes. And when they stood before the Iron Throne, Aerys did not give them a trial. He did not allow them to speak in their own defense. He murdered them. Lord Rhaegar was burned alive while his son Brandon was forced to watch, a noose around his neck. Brandon strangled himself trying to save his father. Both died in the throne room while the court watched in horror. Then Aerys demanded the heads of Robert Baratheon and Eddard Stark, the two men who had been fostered together at the Eyrie. Robert, who was betrothed to Lyanna. Ned, who was now Lord of Winterfell after watching his father and brother die. Jon Arryn, the Lord of the Vale who had fostered them both, refused the king's command. He called his banners instead. The realm exploded into war. Robert's Rebellion, the War of the Usurper. The names differ depending on who tells the story, but the outcome was the same. The great houses chose sides. The Starks, the Baratheons, the Arryns, and the Tullys declared for Robert. The Tyrells and most of the realm stayed loyal to the crown. The Lannisters sat at Casterly Rock and watched, waiting to see which side would win before they committed. And the Kingsguard stood beside their king, because that was the oath. Even when the king was mad, even when the war was his fault, even when standing beside him meant fighting against men who had good reason to rebel. The White Cloak bound them, duty bound them, the vows they had sworn bound them. Arthur Dayne rode to war. He fought for House Targaryen, for King Aerys, for Prince Rhaegar. He led men into battle. His sword flashed pale and deadly. Dawn cut through rebels like they were wheat before a scythe. He was the sword of the morning, and on the battlefield, no one could stand against him. But this was not the kind of war where individual skill mattered most. This was armies clashing. Thousands of men dying in the mud, castles besieged, villages burned, the small folk caught between lords who cared nothing for them. It was brutal, ugly, the kind of war that destroyed the realm even as both sides claimed to be saving it. The Battle of the Trident came in the year 283 after Aegon's conquest. Robert Baratheon led the rebel army. Prince Rhaegar led the royal forces. It should have been the decisive battle, the moment that would determine the war, and it was, but not in the way anyone expected. Arthur Dayne was not at the Trident. Neither was Sir Barristan Selmy. Neither was Lord Commander Gerald Hightower. 3 of the finest knights in the Kingsguard, and none of them stood beside their prince when he needed them most. The question has haunted historians ever since. Where were they? Why were they not there? The answer would come later. But at the time, their absence was felt. Rhaegar fought Robert Baratheon in single combat in the waters of the Trident. The river ran red around them. 2 men who had once known each other, who might have been friends in another life, fighting to the death over a woman and a crown and 1,000 grievances that had festered for too long. Robert won. His warhammer crushed Rhaegar's chest. The rubies on the prince's armor scattered in the water. The Dragon Prince died there in the river, the heir to the Iron Throne, the man who was supposed to save the realm, the man Arthur Dayne had respected and served, dead in the water while his army broke and ran. The war was over. The rebels had won. King Aerys sat in King's Landing with the Lannister army at his gates, not knowing if they came as friends or enemies. And Arthur Dayne was far away in Dawn, at a place called the Tower of Joy. The Tower of Joy was not a grand castle. It was barely more than a holdfast, a round tower in the mountains of Dawn, remote, isolated, the kind of place you went when you did not want to be found. And that was exactly why Arthur was there, because Prince Rhaegar had given him a command, a final duty, something so important that it had kept 3 Kingsguard knights away from the Battle of the Trident. Protect Lyanna Stark. She was in the tower, the woman whose disappearance had started the war, the woman Robert Baratheon was fighting to save, the woman the realm believed had been kidnapped, and she was not alone. 3 of the finest knights in the Kingsguard stood guard. Ser Arthur Dayne, Lord Commander Gerald Hightower, the White Bull, Sir Oswell Went. 3 against the world. They knew Rhaegar was dead. Word had reached them. They knew the war was lost. They knew King Aerys would die soon. that the Targaryens would fall, that everything they had fought for was turning to ash. But they remained at the tower because Rhaegar had commanded it, because Lyanna was inside, and because there was something else, something in that tower worth protecting with their lives. Eddard Stark came for his sister. He brought 6 companions with him, good men, skilled fighters, Lord Willem Dustin, Ethan Glover, Martin Castle, Theo Wool, Sir Mark Ricewell, and Howland Reed, the Lord of Greywater Watch. 7 men against 3. The odds should have favoured Ned Stark. They did not. Arthur Dayne stood before the tower, dawn in his hand, the pale blade glowing in the sunlight. Beside him stood Gerald Hightower and Oswell Went, 3 knights in white cloaks, stained with dust and sweat. They had been at the tower for months, guarding, waiting, knowing this moment would come. Ned Stark tried to talk first. He told them the war was over, that Rhaegar was dead, that Aerys had been killed by Jaime Lannister in the throne room, that Robert sat the Iron Throne now, that there was no more Targaryen dynasty to serve. They could lay down their swords, take the black and join the Night's Watch, live out their days with honor. Arthur Dayne refused. The King's Guard did not flee, did not surrender, did not break their vows just because their king was dead. They had been given a command to guard this place, to protect what was inside, and they would do that duty until they could do it no longer. Ned Stark drew his sword. His companions did the same, and the battle began. 7 against 3. But these were not ordinary 3. These were legends. Arthur Dayne with Dawn, Gerald Hightower, who had served 3 kings, Oswell Went, who had never been defeated in a tourney. They were old, perhaps, tired from months of standing guard, but they were still the best. The fight was brutal. Arthur moved like lightning. Dawn flashed and cut. Men fell. Ethan Glover died. Martin Cassell died. Theo Wool died. Lord Willem Dustin died. Mark Ricewell died. 5 of Ned Stark's 7 companions died in minutes. The King's Guard were that good, that skilled, that deadly. But they were only 3, and the Northmen kept coming. Gerald Hightower fell. Oswell Went fell. And Arthur Dayne, the Sword of the Morning, the greatest knight alive, fought on. He was wounded now, bleeding, tired, but still dangerous, still deadly. Dawn still gleamed in his hand. Ned Stark faced him. Eddard Stark was a good fighter, solid, reliable, trained by the finest masters in the Vale. But he was not Arthur Dayne. No one was Arthur Dayne. In a fair fight, Ned would have died in seconds. Dawn would have cut through his guard and ended him. The fight was not fair. Howland Reed struck from behind. The histories do not say exactly what he did. Some claim he stabbed Arthur in the back. Others say he used a net to tangle him. Others suggest poison darts or some other trick. The Crannogmen have their ways. Ways that knights consider dishonorable, but that work nonetheless. Arthur Dayne fell. The Sword of the Morning. The finest knight of his generation. Perhaps the finest knight who ever lived. He died in the dust outside a tower in Dawn. Far from Starfall. Far from the white stones and the sea. Far from everything he had known. He died keeping a secret, obeying a command from a dead prince, protecting something that would change the realm if it ever became known. Ned Stark took Dawn from Arthur's dead hand. He went into the tower, and there he found his sister Lyanna. She was dying, bleeding, and she was not alone. She held a child, a baby boy with dark hair and purple eyes, a son born of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark. This was what Arthur had died for. Not a kidnapped girl, not a hostage, but a child, the heir to the Iron Throne, if bloodlines mattered, the last living son of Rhaegar Targaryen, the boy who would grow up to be Jon Snow, though the world would not know his true name for years. Lyanna made Ned promise to protect the child, to keep him safe, to never reveal who he really was, because Robert Baratheon would kill him if he knew, would hunt down every last Targaryen and end the bloodline forever. Ned agreed. He took the boy as his own bastard, stained his honor to protect his sister's son, and he buried the secret so deep that even the child himself did not know the truth. Arthur Dayne died, never knowing if his sacrifice mattered. He died believing he had failed, that the Targaryens had fallen, that everything he had fought for was lost. He did not know that the child he protected would grow up to be important, that his death would help preserve the last true Targaryen heir, that his final stand at the Tower of Joy would become legend. Ned Stark ordered the tower pulled down. He buried his sister beneath the stones. He buried his friends who had fallen fighting the Kingsguard. And he took Dorne back to Starfall, because whatever else Arthur Dayne had been, he had been a knight. He had died doing his duty, and his sword deserved to go home. The Danes of Starfall received Ned Stark with honor. They did not blame him for Arthur's death. They understood that Arthur had made his choice, had stood his ground, had died as a knight should, with his sword in his hand and his duty fulfilled. They took Dorne and placed it in the Hall of Heroes, waiting for another Dane to prove worthy, waiting for another Sword of the Morning. Arthur Dayne was dead, the greatest knight of his age, a man who had never been defeated in fair combat, a man who had kept his vows even when they cost him everything, a man who had stood at a tower in Dorne and died protecting a secret that would echo through history. His story should have ended there. But legends do not die easily. The tale of Arthur Dayne lived on, in songs, in stories, in the memories of men who had seen him fight. Ned Stark himself spoke of Arthur with respect, told his children about the Sword of the Morning, about honor and duty and the terrible choices knights must sometimes make. Barristan Selmy survived the war. He had fought at the Trident, been wounded, and was pardoned by Robert Baratheon. He lived to tell the stories of his sworn brother, of the man who had been better than him with a blade, who had served faithfully even when faith was hard, who had died at a tower doing his duty, and Jaime Lannister, who had broken his vows and killed the Mad King, thought often of Arthur Dayne, of the knight who had tried to teach him, who had shown him what the white cloak should mean. Jaime had chosen differently, had put the realm before his king, had broken his oath to save the city, and he would spend the rest of his life wondering if Arthur would have done the same, or if Arthur would have stood beside Aerys and burned with him, because that was what the vows demanded. The Tower of Joy became a place of legend, a symbol of loyalty and tragedy. 7 men went there. Only 2 came back alive, Eddard Stark and Howland Reed, and they carried secrets that would shape the realm for decades to come. Secrets that Arthur Dayne had died to protect. The Sword of the Morning was gone, but his legend remained, and the child he had died protecting would grow up to be important, to be a hero in his own right, to face dangers that Arthur could never have imagined. And perhaps, in some small way, Arthur Dayne's final stand at the Tower of Joy would matter after all. But Arthur would never know. He died in the dust with his king's secrets, with his duty done, with his vows kept to the very end. He died as he had lived, a knight, a guardian, a legend, the sword of the morning, shining bright one last time before the darkness claimed him forever. Most men are forgotten within a generation. Their names fade, their deeds become dust. The world moves on and leaves them behind. But some men become legends. Their stories outlive them. Their names are spoken with reverence decades after they fall. Arthur Dayne was one of those men. He died at the Tower of Joy, but his legend was only beginning. Eddard Stark was the first to carry that legend forward. Ned did not speak often of the war. He did not boast about his victories or tell stories of his battles. But when he spoke of Arthur Dayne, something changed in his voice. A weight, a respect, an acknowledgement that he had faced something extraordinary and survived only through fortune and the help of his companions. Ned told his children about the Sword of the Morning, about a knight who embodied everything the White Cloak should mean. He told them Arthur Dayne was the finest knight he had ever seen, better than Sir Barristan Selmy, better than any man alive. He spoke of dawn, the pale blade that glowed like captured starlight. He spoke of honor and duty and the terrible choices that sometimes came with both. But Ned did not tell his children everything. He did not speak of what was in the tower, of why 3 Kingsguard knights stood guard over his sister, of the child he had found in Lyanna's arms. Those secrets stayed locked in his heart, buried so deep that even his wife did not know the truth. And Howland Reed, the only other survivor, kept the same silence. The small folk created their own stories. They always did. When lords and knights would not speak, the common people filled the silence with songs and tales. The story of the Tower of Joy spread through the realm. 7 against 3. The greatest knights of the age making their final stand, fighting to the death rather than surrender. It was the kind of story that people wanted to believe, that knights could still be noble, that honor still meant something, that men could be true to their vows even when the world had moved on without them. Singers composed ballads about Arthur Dayne. They sang of his skill with a blade, of how Dawn had never been defeated in his hand, of how he had protected his prince's secrets even unto death. The songs were not entirely accurate. They never are. The singers added flourishes, made the battles more dramatic, turned tragedy into romance. But the core remained true. Arthur Dayne had been something special, and the realm remembered. Dawn returned to Starfall, carried by Eddard Stark himself. He did not send servants, did not have it shipped with other goods. He brought the blade personally to the Danes, gave it into their hands with respect and sorrow. It was a gesture that meant something, an acknowledgement that whatever had happened at the Tower of Joy, Arthur Dayne had died a knight, had died doing his duty, and that deserved honor even from an enemy. The Danes received Ned Stark without anger. They did not blame him for Arthur's death. They understood that their kinsman had made a choice, had stood his ground knowing he would die, had fulfilled his vows to the end. That was the Dane way. That was what it meant to be the Sword of the Morning. They mourned Arthur, but they honored his choice. Dawn was placed in the hall at Starfall. The pale blade rested in a place of honor, waiting. No one had yet proven worthy to claim it. Arthur had been the last. His skill had been so great, his dedication so complete, that finding another knight to match him seemed impossible. The sword waited, patient, silent. just as it had waited before Arthur, just as it might wait for generations more. But the memory of Arthur Dayne did not wait. It spread, it grew, it became something larger than the man himself. Knights across the realm spoke his name with reverence. They told their squires about the sword of the morning, about what a true knight should be, about keeping vows even when they cost everything. Arthur became a standard, a measure, the kind of knight everyone aspired to be, but few could achieve. Sir Barristan Selmy spoke of Arthur often. Barristan the Bold had survived the war. He had been wounded at the Trident, fighting for the Targaryens. Robert Baratheon had pardoned him and allowed him to continue serving in the Kingsguard. It was an unusual mercy, but Robert understood that some men were too valuable to kill, too honorable to punish for doing their duty. Barristan served Robert, served King Joffrey after him, but his heart remained with the oaths he had sworn, with the brothers he had lost, and of all those brothers, Arthur Dayne stood highest in his memory. Barristan had fought beside Arthur, had trained with him, had seen him move with a blade, and Barristan, who was himself a legend, freely admitted that Arthur had been better, faster, more skilled, the finest swordsman he had ever known. When Barristan spoke of Arthur, people listened, because Barristan's word meant something. He was not given to exaggeration. He did not flatter or lie. If Barristan Selmy said Arthur Dayne was the greatest, then it was true, and so the legend grew, passed from knight to squire, from father to son, from one generation to the next. Jaime Lannister carried his own complicated relationship with Arthur's memory. Jaime had been the youngest knight ever appointed to the Kingsguard. He had been taught by Arthur and Barristan both, the two finest swordsmen in the realm, training a boy who would himself become a legend. But where Arthur had kept his vows to the death, Jaime had broken his, had killed the king he had sworn to protect, had earned the name Kingslayer. Jaime thought about Arthur often, wondered what Arthur would have done in his place. If Arthur had been in the throne room that day, when Aerys ordered the pyromancers to burn the city. If Arthur had heard the Mad King screaming, "Burn them all," while 500,000 people went about their lives outside the Red Keep. Would Arthur have obeyed? Would he have let King's Landing burn because his oath demanded it? Or would he have done what Jaime did and put his sword through the king's back? Jaime would never know. Arthur had died at the Tower of Joy, had never faced that final test, had never been forced to choose between his vows and the lives of everyone in the city. Maybe that was for the best. Maybe it was better to die a legend than to live as a Kingslayer. Better to be remembered with honor than to carry the weight of a broken oath for the rest of your days. But Jaime had known Arthur, had trained with him, had learned from him, and he knew that Arthur was not perfect. No man was. Arthur had been a weapon, a tool. He had obeyed orders without question, had stood guard at a tower while a war raged, had let men die because his prince commanded it. Was that really honor? Or was it just following orders without thinking about the consequences? These were dangerous thoughts, thoughts that questioned the very foundations of knighthood. But Jaime could not help thinking them. Arthur Dayne had been the greatest knight who ever lived. Everyone agreed on that. But what did that greatness cost? And was it worth the price? The younger generation knew Arthur only through stories. They had never seen him fight, never heard his voice, never stood beside him in the training yard. But they knew his name, knew his legend, knew that he represented something important, something the realm needed to remember. Boys training in castle yards dreamed of being like Arthur Dayne, of earning the title Sword of the Morning, of carrying Dawn and being the finest knight alive. They practiced their sword work and imagined facing him, testing their skill against the legend. Of course they would lose. Everyone lost to Arthur Dayne in these fantasies. But to even stand before him would be honor enough. The maesters recorded Arthur's deeds in their histories. They noted his appointment to the King's Guard, his service during the reign of Aerys II, his death at the Tower of Joy. They were careful with their words, precise. The masters did not deal in legends. They dealt in facts. But even in their dry accounting of events, Arthur Dayne stood out. His skill was undeniable. His service was exemplary. His death was notable. But the masters also wondered. They wrote their questions in the margins of their books. Why had Arthur been at the Tower of Joy? Why had he missed the Battle of the Trident? What was in that tower that required 3 of the finest Kingsguard knights to guard it? The official story said Lyanna Stark was there, that Rhaegar had commanded them to protect her. But the masters suspected there was more, something that Eddard Stark and Howland Reed had taken with them when they left, something important enough to die for. The mystery became part of the legend. Arthur Dayne had died keeping a secret, and that secret had gone with him to the grave. Or had it? Some maesters noted that Ned Stark had returned from the Tower of Joy with a bastard son, a boy named Jon, dark-haired and grey-eyed like a Stark. But why would Ned have brought his bastard to the Tower of Joy? Why would his bastard have been born at the same time and place where Lyanna died? The masters asked their questions, but they found no answers. The secret remained locked away, hidden by Ned Stark's honor and Howland Reed's silence. And so, it became another part of Arthur's legend. The knight who died protecting something so important that even in death, no one spoke of it. In Dawn, Arthur was remembered differently. He was a son of Starfall, a Dane, one of their own who had risen to greatness and died doing his duty. The Dornish were proud of him, proud that a Dornishman had been recognized as the finest knight in the realm, proud that he had carried Dawn and earned the title Sword of the Morning, proud that he had kept his vows even when everything else fell apart. But they also mourned him, mourned what might have been. Arthur could have stayed in Dawn, could have served House Martell, protected Dornish interests, perhaps married and had children, continued the bloodline. Instead, he had gone north, had served the Targaryens, had died far from home in a war that was not really his. The Dornish understood duty, but they also understood loss. Ashara Dayne, Arthur's sister, carried her own grief. The histories say she died shortly after Arthur, that she threw herself from a tower at Starfall into the sea below. The reasons are unclear. Some say she was heartbroken over Arthur's death. Some say she had loved Eddard Stark and been abandoned by him. Some say she bore a stillborn child and could not bear the loss. The truth died with her, but her death added to the tragedy of Arthur's story. The Sword of the Morning who died at a tower, the beautiful sister who died falling from one. The Danes were marked by sorrow. Years passed. A generation grew up knowing Arthur Dayne only as a legend. Robert Baratheon ruled the 7 kingdoms. The Targaryens were gone. The realm was at peace, more or less. The wars and rebellions of the past became stories, history, things that old men talked about while young men listened and wondered if the tales were true. But Arthur's legend endured, in part because men like Barristan kept his memory alive, in part because the songs were too good to forget, but mostly because the realm needed heroes, needed to believe that knights could be noble, that honor meant something, that vows were worth keeping. In a world full of compromise and corruption, Arthur Dayne stood as a reminder of what men could be if they tried. He was not perfect. No man is. He had obeyed a mad king, had let injustice happen because his oath demanded it, had stood aside while terrible things were done. But he had also been loyal, skilled, dedicated. He had kept his word, had protected those placed in his care, had died doing his duty. And in a world where most men broke their promises the moment it was convenient, that meant something. The Tower of Joy became a pilgrimage site of sorts. Not officially. The tower itself had been pulled down. But people came to the place. Knights, soldiers, common folk who believed in legends. They came to see where Arthur Dayne had made his final stand, where the greatest knight who ever lived had fallen. They stood in the dust and imagined the battle. 7 against 3, dawn flashing in the sunlight, men dying for honor and duty and secrets that would never be told. And they left offerings, small things, flowers, coins, tokens, a way of saying they remembered that Arthur Dayne's sacrifice had not been forgotten, that his legend lived on, that somewhere in the realm, people still believed in knights and honor and dying for something greater than yourself. Arthur Dayne had been dead for years. His body was dust. His secrets were buried. His time had passed, but his legend remained, bright as dawn, enduring as the stars, a reminder of what knights should be, of what duty meant, of the price that honor sometimes demanded. The sword of the morning was gone, but his light still shone. And as long as people remembered his name, as long as they told his stories, as long as they tried to live up to his example, Arthur Dayne would never truly die. He had become more than a man, more than a knight. He had become an ideal, a standard, a legend. And legends, unlike men, can live forever. The Tower of Joy holds more questions than answers, and Arthur Dayne stands at the center of every mystery. The official history is simple enough. 3 Kingsguard knights guarded Lyanna Stark. 7 Northmen came to rescue her. A battle ensued. The Kingsguard died. Lyanna died. Ned Stark brought her body home. But the simple version leaves too much unexplained, too many gaps, too many choices that do not make sense unless something else was happening, something the histories do not record. The first question is the most obvious. Why was Arthur Dayne at the Tower of Joy instead of the Trident? Prince Rhaegar led the royal army into the most important battle of the war, the battle that would decide everything. He needed his best fighters beside him. He needed the Kingsguard. Yet 3 of the finest knights in the order were absent. Arthur Dayne, Gerald Hightower, Oswell Went, the 3 who might have made the difference. Some believe Rhaegar commanded them to guard Lyanna, that he loved her so much he wanted his best knights protecting her. But this explanation does not satisfy everyone. Rhaegar was not a fool. He understood strategy. He knew the Trident was critical. If he lost there, the war was over. The Targaryens would fall. Everything would be lost. Why would he weaken his army by sending his best fighters away? Unless what they were protecting was more important than winning the battle, unless there was something at the Tower of Joy that mattered more than the war itself, something worth dying for, something worth sacrificing everything to keep safe. The answer lies with the child, Jon Snow, the boy Ned Stark claimed as his bastard, dark-haired, grey-eyed, raised at Winterfell as a Snow, not a Stark. But some readers of the histories have looked closer, have noticed things that do not add up, have asked questions that make the official story seem less certain. The theory goes like this. Lyanna Stark was not kidnapped. She went with Rhaegar willingly. They loved each other. Perhaps they even married in secret. And at the Tower of Joy, she gave birth to Rhaegar's son, a child with Targaryen blood and Stark blood, a child who represented the joining of ice and fire, a child Rhaegar believed was important, perhaps even the prince that was promised from the prophecies he was obsessed with. This would explain why Arthur was at the tower. He was not guarding a kidnapped girl. He was guarding the heir to the Iron Throne, the last living son of Rhaegar Targaryen, a child whose life was worth more than any battle, worth more than the war itself. If this theory is true, then Arthur died protecting not just a secret, but a king. But this is speculation. The books do not confirm it explicitly. The evidence exists in hints and suggestions, in things left unsaid, in the gaps between what we know and what we can prove. Maesters and readers alike have debated this for years. Some are convinced, others remain skeptical. The truth may never be fully known. What we do know is that Arthur Dayne made a choice. He stayed at the Tower of Joy when he could have ridden to the Trident. He stood his ground when he could have fled. He fought to the death when he could have surrendered. These choices suggest he believed what he was protecting mattered, that his duty there was absolute, that nothing, not even winning the war, could make him abandon his post. Another theory concerns Arthur's relationship with his orders. The Kingsguard oath is clear. Obey the king, protect the royal family, keep their secrets. But what happens when the king is mad? When his orders lead to injustice? When obeying means standing aside while terrible things happen? Did Arthur struggle with this? Or did he simply obey without question? Some believe Arthur was conflicted, that he served Aerys out of duty but respected Rhaegar out of choice, that he followed his orders but wondered if they were right, that beneath the legendary skill and the perfect obedience there was a man who questioned, who doubted, who struggled with the weight of his vows. Others believe Arthur was simpler than that he took his oaths literally, that once he swore to serve, he served without reservation. That questioning was not in his nature, that he was, in essence, a perfect weapon, sharp, deadly, obedient, a tool that did what it was made to do without wondering if it should. The truth is probably somewhere between these extremes. Arthur was a man, not a myth. Men are complicated. They hold contradictions. They can believe in duty while questioning their orders. They can serve faithfully while wishing things were different. Arthur likely struggled more than the legends suggest, but he kept those struggles private, hidden behind the white cloak and the perfect discipline. One persistent theory involves what Arthur told Ned Stark in his final moments. The histories record that Arthur fought to the death, that he fell only after most of Ned's companions were already dead, but they do not record any last words, any final message. Did Arthur die in silence, or did he speak before the end? Some believe Arthur told Ned the truth about Jon, that with his dying breath, he revealed the child's parentage, explained why the King's Guard had been at the tower, asked Ned to protect the boy. This would explain why Ned took Jon as his own, why he never told anyone the truth, why he stained his honor with a bastard that was not really his. Arthur's last request would have bound Ned as surely as any oath. But this is speculation. Ned never spoke of what happened at the Tower of Joy. Neither did Howland Reed. If Arthur said anything before he died, it went with him to the grave, or was locked in Ned's heart so deep that even his wife never learned it. The theory makes sense. It explains much, but it cannot be proven. Not from the texts we have, not from the histories that survive. Another mystery surrounds Dawn itself, the pale blade forged from a fallen star. Arthur wielded it with unmatched skill. But what happened to the sword after his death? We know Ned returned it to Starfall. That much is confirmed. But what of Dawn's future? Will it remain on the wall at Starfall forever? Or will another Sword of the Morning rise to claim it? Some theorists believe Dawn has a greater purpose, that the sword will return to the story, that it was not just a weapon, but a symbol, perhaps even a magical artifact with properties not fully understood. The fact that it was forged from a fallen star suggests something special, something beyond normal steel, even beyond Valyrian steel, a weapon that might matter in the wars to come. But again, this is speculation. The books tell us Dawn is at Starfall. They do not tell us it will return. They do not promise another Sword of the Morning. The sword might sit in its place of honor for generations, might never be wielded in battle again. Or it might be taken up by a new champion when the realm needs it most. We cannot know. Not yet. The relationship between Arthur and Ashara Dayne has also sparked theories. Ashara was Arthur's sister, beautiful, tragic. She died shortly after Arthur, throwing herself from a tower into the sea. But why? What drove her to such despair? The histories offer several possibilities, but no certainties. Some believe Ashara loved Eddard Stark, that they met at the tourney at Harrenhal, that something happened between them. Perhaps she bore his child. Perhaps the child died. Perhaps when Ned returned from the Tower of Joy with Jon, claiming the boy as his bastard by another woman, Ashara could not bear it. The loss of Arthur combined with rejection by Ned was too much. Others believe Ashara's grief was simpler, that losing Arthur broke her. He was her brother, her family, perhaps her protector. When he died far from home, killed by Northmen at a tower in Dawn, something in Ashara shattered. The theories suggest she could not live in a world without him, that her leap from the tower was not about romantic love, but familial love, about losing the person who mattered most. But there are darker theories too. Some suggest Ashara knew secrets, that she knew what was in the Tower of Joy, that she knew about Jon's true parentage, and that knowing these things made her dangerous, that her death was not suicide, but murder, made to look like suicide. These theories are darker, more cynical. They suggest conspiracy where grief might be explanation enough, but they persist because the gaps in the history allow them. The truth about Ashara, like so much else, died with her. We know she fell from a tower. We know she died. We know it happened after Arthur's death. But why? What drove her to it? The histories do not say. And so the theories multiply, each trying to fill the silence with answers. Perhaps the most controversial theory concerns Arthur's loyalty itself. Did he serve the right side? He fought for the Targaryens, For a mad king who burned men alive, for a dynasty that had ruled through dragons and fear, Robert's rebellion was justified in many ways. Aerys was a tyrant. His death improved the realm. So was Arthur on the wrong side? Was his legendary loyalty actually a flaw? Should he have broken his oaths and joined the rebels? Some argue yes, that Arthur's greatest failing was blind obedience, that he should have seen Aerys was mad, should have recognized that serving him was wrong, should have put the realm before his vows, that a truly great knight would have made the hard choice, would have broken his oath to save the kingdom, would have been more like Jaime Lannister, who killed his king to prevent a massacre. Others argue no, that oaths mean nothing if you break them when they become inconvenient, that Arthur's loyalty was his greatest virtue, not his flaw, that he served faithfully because that is what knights do, that questioning orders leads to chaos, that if every knight decided for himself which kings to serve and which to betray, there would be no order at all, that Arthur was right to keep his vows, even unto death. This debate has no clear answer. It depends on what you value more, loyalty or justice, oaths or outcomes, duty or conscience. Arthur Dayne made his choice. He served the Targaryens. He died at the Tower of Joy. History remembers him as a hero. But was he? Or was he a cautionary tale about the dangers of following orders without questioning them? The final theory concerns what Arthur knew, about the wildfire under King's Landing, about Aerys' plans to burn the city, about the madness that had consumed the king. Did Arthur know? If he did, why did he not act? Why did he not warn someone? Why did he let Jaime Lannister carry the burden alone? Some believe Arthur did not know, that he was at the Tower of Joy during the final days, that by the time Aerys was ready to burn King's Landing, Arthur was far away in Dorne. He never faced the choice Jaime faced, never had to decide between his oath and 500,000 lives. He was spared that test. Others believe Arthur knew more than he let on, that the king's guards saw everything, heard everything, that Arthur must have known about the wildfire, about the plans, about the danger, and that he chose to remain silent because his oath demanded it, that he would have let the city burn rather than break his vows, that he was, in this way, less than Jaime, less heroic, more dangerous. But we do not know. Arthur died before the final test came, before Aerys gave the order to burn them all, before Jaime put his sword through the king's back. Arthur's legacy is untainted by kingslaying because he never had to make that choice. Whether he would have chosen differently than Jaime is a question that will never be answered. All of these theories share one thing. They try to make sense of Arthur Dayne, to understand a man who became a legend, to find the human being beneath the white cloak and the pale sword, to explain choices that seem, at first glance, either heroic or tragic or both. The truth is that Arthur Dayne was complicated. Like all men, he was loyal and skilled and dedicated, but he also served a mad king, stood aside while injustices occurred, kept secrets that might have mattered. He was the finest knight of his age. But being the finest knight did not make him perfect, did not mean all his choices were right, did not guarantee that his legend tells the whole story. What we can say with certainty is this: Arthur Dayne died at the Tower of Joy, protecting something he believed was important. He kept his vows to the end. He fought with legendary skill and lost only because he was outnumbered and betrayed by tactics he considered dishonorable. And he left behind mysteries that the realm is still trying to solve. Whether those mysteries will ever be fully answered remains to be seen. The books continue, the story unfolds, and perhaps someday the truth about Arthur Dayne and the Tower of Joy will be revealed. But until then, we have only theories, only speculation, only questions asked across the gap between what we know and what we wish we knew. Arthur Dayne, the Sword of the Morning, took his secrets to the grave, and the realm has been trying to dig them up ever since. Arthur Dayne's sword has been returned to Starfall, but his shadow still falls across Westeros. More than a decade after his death at the Tower of Joy, his name still carries weight, his legend still inspires. His choices still echo through the lives of those who came after. To understand what Arthur Dayne meant to the realm, we must look not just at what he did, but at what he represents, what he teaches us about honor and duty and the cost of both. The most obvious part of Arthur's legacy is Jon Snow. If the theories are true, if Jon is indeed the son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, then Arthur died protecting the heir to the Iron Throne. The boy who would grow up believing himself a bastard, who would join the Night's Watch, who would face the darkness beyond the wall, who would become important in ways Arthur could never have foreseen. Jon grew up at Winterfell, raised alongside Ned Stark's legitimate children, but always set apart, always the bastard, always the one who did not quite belong. He heard stories about his supposed father, about Ned Stark's honor, about the war, about the men Ned had fought against. And surely he heard about Arthur Dayne, about the Sword of the Morning, about the finest knight who ever lived. What must it have been like for Jon to hear those stories, to know that his father, Honorable Ned Stark, spoke of Arthur with respect, that the man who had supposedly fathered a bastard during the war nonetheless honored the knight who had tried to kill him. Jon learned about honor from those stories, about how complicated it could be, about how good men could fight on opposite sides and still respect each other. If Jon is truly Rhaegar's son, then Arthur's death was not meaningless. The knight died to protect a child who would matter, who would grow up to defend the realm against threats Arthur never imagined. The White Walkers stirring beyond the wall, the ancient evil returning, the long night coming again. Arthur fought in the wars of men. Jon would fight in the war for humanity itself. But even if the theories are wrong, even if Jon is just Ned's bastard and nothing more, Arthur's legacy still touches him. Because Jon grew up hearing about what knights should be, about duty and honor and keeping your vows. These lessons shaped him, made him the kind of man who would take the black and serve at the wall, who would lead the Night's Watch, who would make hard choices because they were right, not because they were easy. Arthur's influence on Ned Stark himself cannot be overstated. Ned was a good man before the Tower of Joy, honorable, just, but facing Arthur Dayne changed him, taught him something about the complexity of honor, about how men could serve evil causes with good intentions, about how legends could bleed and die like anyone else. Ned returned Dawn to Starfall personally. He did not have to do that. He could have sent the sword with servants, could have had it shipped, but he took it himself, rode to Starfall, faced the Danes, handed them their kinsman's blade. It was an act of respect, an acknowledgement that Arthur had died doing his duty, even if that duty had been misplaced, even if he had served the wrong side. This gesture shaped how Ned ruled the North. He learned that enemies could be honorable, that fighting someone did not mean you had to hate them, that recognizing another man's courage did not diminish your own. These lessons made Ned a better lord, a more just ruler, a man who tried to see beyond simple categories of friend and enemy, loyal and traitor. When Ned went south to serve as Hand of the King, he took these lessons with him. He tried to rule justly, to see the complexity in situations, to honor his opponents even when he opposed them. It did not save him. In the end, Ned's honor got him killed. But the way he lived influenced his children, taught them what mattered. And that teaching came in part from Arthur Dayne, from the lesson learned at the Tower of Joy about what honor truly meant. Jaime Lannister carried perhaps the most complicated relationship with Arthur's legacy. Jaime had been trained by Arthur, had learned from the Sword of the Morning himself, had seen what a true knight could be. And then Jaime had broken his vows, had killed the king he had sworn to protect, had earned the name Kingslayer and worn it like a scar for the rest of his life. Jaime often thought about Arthur, wondered what the Sword of the Morning would think of him. Would Arthur understand why Jaime had killed Aerys? Would he acknowledge that saving 500,000 people was worth breaking an oath? Or would Arthur condemn him? Would the greatest knight who ever lived look at Jaime with disgust for betraying everything the White Cloak stood for? These questions haunted Jaime, because Arthur represented what Jaime had wanted to be, the perfect knight, the legend, the man who kept his vows no matter what. But Arthur had died before facing the final test, before being forced to choose between his oath and the lives of everyone in King's Landing. Jaime had faced that test, and he had chosen life over loyalty, the realm over his king. Was that the right choice? Most people thought not. They called him Kingslayer with contempt, saw him as a traitor and an oath-breaker. They did not know about the wildfire, did not know that Aerys had been about to burn the city, did not know that Jaime had saved them all. And Jaime did not tell them. He kept the secret, let them think the worst of him. Because explaining felt like making excuses, and Jaime Lannister did not make excuses. But he thought about Arthur, wondered if the Sword of the Morning would have done the same, or if Arthur would have stood beside the king and let the city burn, if Arthur would have kept his oath even unto damnation. Jaime would never know, but the question shaped him, made him think about what honor really meant, about whether keeping vows was always right, about the cost of being a legend. Barristan Selmy lived with Arthur's memory too. Barristan had fought beside Arthur for years, had called him brother, had seen him in battle and in training, had known him as well as anyone could know a sworn brother of the Kingsguard. And Barristan had survived where Arthur had fallen, had lived long enough to serve multiple kings, to see the realm change, to watch as the Targaryens fell and the Baratheons rose and the Game of Thrones continued without pause. Barristan spoke of Arthur to anyone who would listen. He did not do this out of grief alone. He did it to preserve something, to remind the realm what knights should be. In a world where honor was increasingly rare, where oaths were broken as easily as made, where power mattered more than justice, Barristan held up Arthur Dayne as an example, a reminder, a standard. But even Barristan acknowledged the complexity. He knew Arthur had served a mad king, had stood aside while Aerys burned men alive, had obeyed orders that should have been questioned. Barristan himself had done the same, had been part of the same system, had worn the same white cloak and followed the same commands. He understood that legends were complicated, that great men could make terrible choices, that doing your duty was not always the same as doing right. This understanding made Barristan's own story richer. When he finally left Westeros and went east to find Daenerys Targaryen, he was still trying to be the knight Arthur had been, still trying to serve with honor. But he was also trying to learn from Arthur's mistakes, to serve a ruler worth serving, to use his sword for something just, not just something commanded. Arthur's legacy pushed Barristan forward, made him keep trying, keep believing, keep hoping that somewhere there was a cause worth dying for. The younger knights who came after grew up with Arthur's legend. They heard the stories, dreamed of being like him, practiced their sword work imagining they were the sword of the morning. But they also lived in a different world, a world where the Targaryens were gone, where the King's Guard was diminished, where knights were as likely to be thugs in armor as heroes from songs. Arthur's legend became aspirational, something to aim for even if you knew you would fall short. Young knights looked at the gap between what they were and what Arthur had been, and some of them tried to bridge it, tried to be better, more skilled, more honorable, more dedicated. They failed mostly because Arthur had been extraordinary, because legends are made, not born, because being the finest knight who ever lived takes more than wanting it. But the trying mattered. The aspiration mattered. Even in a realm that was growing darker and more cynical, Arthur Dayne's name still meant something, still inspired, still reminded people that knights could be more than killers in fancy armor, that honor could exist, that vows could be kept, that legends could be real. The Danes themselves carried the weight of Arthur's memory in their own way. Starfall remained the seat of House Dayne. Dawn remained in the Hall of Heroes, and no one had yet claimed it. No knight had proven worthy. The title Sword of the Morning sat vacant, waiting, patient as the stars. Its absence itself became meaningful. The fact that no one had matched Arthur said something about how rare true greatness was, about how high the standard had been set. The Danes did not lower that standard. They did not give dawn to someone unworthy just to have a sword of the morning again. They waited, and in waiting, they honored Arthur, acknowledged that what he had been could not be easily replaced. But waiting also created pressure. Young Danes grew up in Arthur's shadow, knowing they were measured against him, knowing that unless they proved themselves extraordinary, they would never carry dawn. Some of them resented this, others embraced it. All of them were shaped by it. Arthur's legacy was not just inspiration, it was also burden. The weight of being related to a legend, of knowing you would probably never measure up. The Tower of Joy itself became a symbol. Though the tower had been pulled down, people still knew where it had stood, still came to see the place, to pay respects, to remember. The site represented something important. The place where the old world had died, where the last true Targaryens had made their stand, where Arthur Dayne and his brothers had fought 7 men and nearly won. Travelers to Dawn would sometimes detour to see it, would stand in the dust and imagine the battle. 7 against 3, the clash of steel, the cries of dying men, dawn flashing in the sunlight one last time. It was not a shrine exactly. The faith did not canonize Arthur, but it was holy in its own way, a place where something important had happened, where the realm had changed, where legend had been born. The stories told about Arthur evolved over time. Singers added details that were not true, made the battles more dramatic, added romance and tragedy in equal measure. The real Arthur Dayne became harder to see through the fog of legend. But perhaps that was inevitable. Perhaps that is what happens to all great men after they die. They become symbols, ideas, lessons. The specifics fade and the meaning remains. What meaning did Arthur Dayne carry? It depended on who told the story. To some, he represented loyalty, the knight who kept his vows no matter what, who served to the end, who never wavered. These people saw Arthur as an example to follow, a reminder that duty mattered, that honor was not just a word. To others, Arthur represented tragedy, a good man serving a bad cause, a great knight wasting his life protecting a mad king's secrets, a legend who died for nothing. These people saw Arthur as a warning about the dangers of blind obedience, about how loyalty could become a chain, about how following orders was not always right. Both interpretations held truth. Arthur had been loyal to a fault, had served Aerys when he should not have, had stood at the Tower of Joy when he should have been at the Trident, had died for secrets that should have been spoken. But he had also been magnificent, skilled beyond measure, dedicated, true to his word, a knight who embodied the ideals even as he revealed their limitations. The real legacy of Arthur Dayne is that he forces us to think about these things, about what honor means, about when oaths should be kept and when they should be broken, about the difference between duty and justice, about whether being a legend is worth the cost. These are not easy questions. They do not have simple answers, but they are important questions, the kind that define what kind of people we want to be. In the world of ice and fire, where winter is coming and dangers are rising, Arthur's legacy matters more than ever, because the realm needs knights, needs heroes, needs people who will stand and fight when everything seems lost, not because they are told to, not because they will be rewarded, but because it is right, because some things are worth dying for. Arthur died at the Tower of Joy, but what he died for matters. If he died protecting Jon Snow, protecting the heir who would grow up to defend the realm, then his death had meaning. If he died simply following orders, serving a dead prince's wishes without thought, then his death was waste. We do not know which is true. Perhaps we never will. But we know this. Arthur Dayne tried. He gave everything to his vows. He served to the best of his ability. He kept his word. He died with his duty done. That has to count for something. In a world where most people break their promises the moment it is convenient, where honor is often just a word, where knights are frequently just thugs in armor, Arthur stood out. He was better. He tried harder. He meant it. Maybe that is enough. Maybe being a legend is not about being perfect. Maybe it is about trying to be perfect even when you know you will fall short, about holding yourself to a standard even when no one is watching, about doing your duty even when it costs you everything. Arthur Dayne did that, and the realm remembers. Dawn waits at Starfall, silent, patient, the pale blade forged from a fallen star, waiting for another knight worthy to wield it, waiting for another sword of the morning. That knight may come someday, may prove themselves worthy, may take up the blade and carry Arthur's legacy forward. Or maybe not. Maybe Arthur was the last. Maybe no one will ever match him again. But even if Dawn never leaves Starfall again, Arthur's legend lives on. In the stories people tell, in the knights who try to be like him, in the children who hear his name and dream of glory, in the hard questions his life raises, in the example he set, flawed and complicated as it was. Arthur Dayne, the Sword of the Morning, died at the Tower of Joy, but he lives on in the realm's memory, in its conscience, in its aspiration to be better than it is. He was not perfect, no man is, but he was great, and greatness, even flawed greatness, matters. It inspires, it challenges, it reminds us what we could be if we tried. The morning star that fell to earth thousands of years ago became Dawn. Dawn became legend in Arthur's hands, and Arthur became legend himself, a symbol of everything knight should be, a reminder of the cost of honor, a question about what duty means, a story that will be told as long as people remember what it means to try to be good in a world that makes goodness hard. That is Arthur Dayne's legacy, not just his skill with a blade, not just his white cloak, not just his death at a tower in Dawn, but everything he represented, everything he tried to be, everything he makes us think about when we hear his name. The Sword of the Morning blazed bright for his time, and though he is gone, his light still shines, still guides, still reminds us that legends are not just stories about the past. They are challenges for the future, questions we must answer for ourselves, standards we must try to meet. Arthur Dayne set that standard, and the realm is still trying to reach it, still trying to be worthy of the name knight, still trying to understand what honor means in a world of ice and fire, still trying to be better, because a knight from Dawn who wielded a pale blade and died keeping a secret showed us what was possible. And showing us what was possible changed everything. If you see Arthur Dayne's choices differently after walking through his life step by step, you are not alone. The Sword of the Morning was complex. His legend is complicated. The questions he raises have no easy answers. But that is what makes his story worth telling. That is what makes his legacy endure. Share your thoughts and your own theories in the comments below. Debate what Arthur meant, what his choices teach us, whether he was hero or cautionary tale or both. And if you would like more journeys through the hidden corners of Westeros and beyond, through the knights and lords and secrets that shape the realm, subscribe and join us. Because the story of ice and fire is filled with legends, and every legend has something to teach us. Every legend changes how we see the world. Every legend matters. Just like Arthur Dayne mattered. Just like the Sword of the Morning still matters, years after he fell. The dawn he carried may have set, but dawn comes again, always, and perhaps someday another knight will prove worthy, another Sword of the Morning will rise, another legend will be born. Until then, we have the stories, we have the questions, we have the example Arthur set, and we have the challenge to be better than we are, to try harder, to keep our vows, to stand when it would be easier to fall, to be knights even in a world that no longer believes in them. That is what Arthur Dayne gave us. That is his gift. That is his legacy. The Sword of the Morning is gone, but the morning comes regardless. And when it does, his light still shines, still inspires, still challenges us to be worthy of the legends we tell.